War. War never changes. In the beginning we fought in turns, lost souls on barren isometric wastelands. As time rolled on, new tactics were employed, some successful, others not. But war rages onward. Battles are fought on new lands, the best laid plans left to rot in the desert of time. As generations come and go, new troops take the oath. New heroes for new causes, but beneath the surface, they're all the same. Because war never changes. The story of the Fallout series starts in a desert in 1988. Wasteland, a game developed by Interplay and published by EA, was a computerized tabletop role-playing game set around various enclaves of human civilization in the American Southwest in the wake of an apocalyptic nuclear war. EA attempted to do a sequel without Interplay's involvement, but the Florida set Fountain of Dreams was basically a load of mutilated bollocks. Interplay, who couldn't pull the Wasteland IP from EA's grasps, tried a spiritual successor of their very own, but meantime never saw the light of day. It wasn't until 1997 that Interplay had another swing at the apocalypse. Fallout, released in 1997 and set in 2161, is an isometric role-playing game with turn-based combat set in an alternative future ravaged by nuclear war. You play as a dweller of Vault 13, one of many underground strongholds humanity used to brave the nuclear fallout. You're sent out into the wasteland to retrieve a water computer chip so that your friends and family in the vault wouldn't have to drink irradiated water and turn into freaks of nature. Your main quest is to retrieve the chip before the ever-present counter reaches zero, but Fallout's biggest hook was the variety of adventures to be found off the beaten path. The random encounters you'd have on the map, the way situations could be flipped on their heads by choosing the correct dialogue options. All of these infused with a comically dark sense of humor. Player movement was controlled in real time, but once combat was initiated, your actions, shooting, moving and reloading, were restricted by the number of action points available in each turn. It was an elegant system that allowed players to take time to plan during combat scenarios without reducing these encounters to instant sub-games. Fallout struck a chord with gamers at the time. Rumour has it the designers were under pressure from Interplay to mould it closer to the massively successful Diablo released the previous year, but Fallout's slower-paced, story-focused gameplay, 1950s science fiction motif and unique setting made it a classic of its very own. And you know what classics get? Sequels! Developed by Black Isle Studios, Fallout 2, set 80 years after the first game, featured a larger game world and storyline, though the setup is a very familiar one. This time it tells the story of a descendant of the first game's protagonist, as he or she attempts to save their tribe from starvation by finding a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GEX. No, Gek. Man, do you remember Gex? The gecko thing? He sort of looked like James Bond in that one game. Remember in the UK release he was voiced by the cat from Red Dwarf? No? Anybody? We should do an episode about Gex, right? It had a chick from Baywatch in it. You know, cause she's so pro at acting. Remember? Hey, let's all do a Kickstart. It had larger towns, was a lot less buggy, and employed a new reputation system, but it only came out a year after the first game, so as a sequel it stayed super close to the formula, except now it had way more porn and hookers. These two represent the first chapter in the Fallout series history and are best played as a set. In fact, both are available on Steam and GOG for less than the cost of a copy of Gex 3 Deep Cover Gecko. After Fallout 2, the series kicked into sequel overdrive, though the lack of direction inevitably led to a drop in quality. Black Isle was sent off to make the next game in the Fallout series, Van Buren. Interplay concentrated their efforts on a real-time shooter for consoles, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, while Microforte worked on the next game in the series, Fallout Tactics. In 2001, Tactics would be the first of these projects to be released, but its direction split the deck for fans. Tactics was much more of a combat-centric game with less characters to chat and interact with. It was also the first in this series to allow for real-time combat, though individual turn-based mode could also be used, which worked basically the same as the original games. Tactics placed you in the steel boots of a Brotherhood splinter group and resides in a grey, semi-canon area of the series, taking place in the American Midwest, where, as the name suggests, you take control of various members of the Brotherhood of Steel, a quasi-religious organization bent on restoring civilization and killing armies of robots. Despite this slight shift in direction, Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel reviewed well, which may be partly the reason why the next spin-off in the series basically had the same name. 2004's Fallout Brotherhood of Steel isn't a bad game, but it's certainly the runt of the irradiated litter. It's a top-down linear shooter that came out on the original Xbox and PlayStation 2 and is exactly the sort of game you'd expect from the first part of this sentence. The third Fallout game in development around this time, Black Isle's Fallout 3 Van Buren, never actually saw the light of day. A leaked version would appear years later, but it would take a new console generation and 4 years before the series would resurface again. While all this was going on, Interplay were having a tough time of it. Bad management and an ill-fated float on the Nasdaq led to majority stakeholder Titus taking control of the company. And as my grandfather used to tell me, you know you're in trouble when your studio is sold to a French publisher named after a shit Amiga game. In any case, the IP was eventually sold to Bethesda in 2007, and Todd Howard celebrated by brushing his amazing hair. So, from the franchise moving from Interplay, a company responsible for some of the most loved traditional RPGs on PC, to Bethesda, one who made first-person role-playing experiences, fans were worried that the new owners would ruin the game by making fundamental changes. But just like the Vault Dwellers themselves, it was time for the series to re-emerge from the darkness and begin life anew.
I don't want to set the world on fire.
Bethesda Softworks, hot off the heels of their massive success with Oblivion, released Fallout 3 in 2008, and then it basically won all of the Game of the Year awards. Now, I'm no programmer, but what they basically did was take Oblivion, delete all the wizards and forests, and then repopulate the world with broken freeways and villages filled with depressed people. I can still remember the first time I emerged from the vault and saw the capital wasteland for the very first time. That sense of adventure at seeing the rolling landscape laid out in front of you. For years, World of Warcraft's cartoonish art style was heralded as the major reason why people play that game for hours on end. In more modern times, games like Far Cry 3 and Skyrim are all beautiful games that are a pleasure to spend time in and explore. But the miserable yellow and green desolate hellhole of the capital wasteland is also one of the most beloved game worlds in recent memory. Like the original games, Fallout 3's wonder came from the characters and stories you came in contact with, the history of these places, the moral quandaries of their inhabitants, the social stigmas, warring parties, the tiny sparkles of hope in an otherwise sea of hopelessness. Fallout 3 is a game about humanity. At the same time, the wasteland had its fair share of the absurd and harrowing, finding the sovereign nation state of the Republic of Dave, breaking into other vaults and seeing the results of horrible tests gone bad, and sneaking up on people and putting live grenades in their pockets.
Get out of the way!
The from-the-hip combat was decent, but in a masterstroke of design, Bethesda retained the turn-based VAT system of the original games, allowing you to freeze time and tactically blow dudes' arms, legs, and faces off. Violence in games is often criticised, but in games like Fallout 3 it works. Seeing somebody you just had a pleasant conversation with blown into disgusting red chunks reminds you of the fragility of life and the everyday nature of death on the wastelands. Like the first game, the story has you emerge from one of Vault-Tech's underground bunkers, this time in an attempt to find your father and the truth of his disappearance. And seeing as your dad is Liam Neeson, it plays out like a sort of reverse Taken movie, where you must chase down and locate your dad in an attempt to find out what the fuck is going on. And then he just keeps not telling you and disappearing off somewhere else. So you just have to take all your anger out on all these innocent people! The story was augmented and its rather nonsensical ending changed by a number of DLC expansion packs, but fans chomping at the bit for more Fallout wouldn't have to wait too long. Obsidian Entertainment, many of whom actually worked on the first two games, picked up the Fallout ball in 2010 with Fallout New Vegas, a game set in and around the ruins of the City of Sin. As with Fallout 1 and 2, on a technical level, New Vegas was almost identical to Fallout 3, and it builds on the solid core of the previous game with a more involved plot and several additional features. The reputation system from 2 was reintroduced, as the player was allowed to choose sides between various warring factions. Cooking was brought in, as was weapon modification, dozens of new items, a cleaner third-person perspective, and iron sights for first-person gunplay. Like Fallout 3, New Vegas is packed full of astonishing moments and encounters. It's well worth playing today, and in fact, chances are you're probably considering going back to give it another shot right now. And that's the pleasant surprise with these new games. We're not short of reboots in this industry, but all too often they fall way short of the lofty expectations laboured on them by fans like us. So the fact that these games have recaptured the imaginations of gamers, just like the original games did in the 90s, is really astonishing. Fallout now stands as one of the most beloved gaming franchises of modern times. Last year, Interplay's founder Brian Fargo smashed his Kickstarter goal for Wasteland 2, and with Bethesda saying 2013 will be a big year for the company, fans are hoping that a return to the irradiated future isn't too far away.